A tense silence hung in the air of the quiet café, broken only by the soft murmur of conversation, until it wasn't. Without warning, a woman's voice shattered the calm, sharp with disbelief and anger. She lurched to her feet, eyes wide with accusation, her voice trembling as she shouted, "You were watching me. And now my wallet is gone." The room fell deathly still, every pair of eyes snapping to the black man she pointed at. Suspicion hung thick in the air as the weight of her words hung over the room, an accusation based on a fleeting moment, but threatening to ignite a wildfire of doubt. Something was about to unravel, and nobody knew who would emerge untarnished. How would you react if you were accused of a crime you did not commit in front of a crowd of strangers? Please share your thoughts and solutions below in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow dramatic stories like this. Veronica Stanton prided herself on order and propriety. Every morning, as she adjusted her neatly pressed blouse and perfectly set pearls, she believed that the world owed her impeccable standards of behavior and decorum. Living in the leafy suburb of Northwood, she had built a life where nothing deviated from her carefully curated routine. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay a simmering resentment, an intolerance she refused to acknowledge even to herself. It was on a brisk autumn morning when Veronica set out to her favorite café, the Corner Bean, a quaint establishment known for its artisanal brews and the slow, deliberate pace of its patrons. The café was a microcosm of the community, a blend of long-time locals, young professionals, and the occasional visitor seeking refuge from the biting chill outside. Veronica entered with her usual air of entitlement, her eyes darting about as if silently judging every detail, the mismatched chairs, the modern art on the walls, the varied clientele. Unbeknownst to her, that day would bring an incident that would send ripples through the community and expose truths far deeper than a misplaced wallet. As Veronica settled into a corner table, her gaze fell on Jamal Carter, a tall, well-dressed man with a calm demeanor. Jamal had been a familiar face in Northwood for years. He was known for his courteous nature and the soft-spoken way he interacted with everyone, from the elderly Mrs. Parker at the grocery store to the local bus driver who always greeted him with a smile. Veronica's first impression of Jamal was tainted by a prejudice she could neither hide nor deny. In her mind, he represented everything that disturbed her vision of a proper neighborhood. As she sipped her coffee and perused the day's newspaper, she began to scrutinize him through the window, her thoughts already darkened by unfounded suspicions. It wasn't long before the calm of the café was shattered. Veronica suddenly clutched her purse as if seized by an invisible dread. In that frantic moment, her eyes widened, and a strangled gasp escaped her lips. In her haste and confusion, she leapt to her feet and pointed an accusing finger in Jamal's direction. You stole my wallet," she cried, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. The café fell into stunned silence. Heads turned, and conversations halted mid-sentence. Jamal, who had been quietly reading a book near the window, looked up in shock. His eyes widened not with guilt, but with genuine surprise and hurt. I didn't take anything," he stammered, his tone calm yet edged with disbelief at the baseless claim. Veronica's outburst was not simply a mistake of memory or a momentary lapse, it was a culmination of her deep-seated biases. Her voice, shrill and demanding, echoed off the walls as she detailed her accusation. "I know what I saw. You lurking around. And then my wallet was gone. How dare you?" she insisted, her tone laced with a venom that left little room for reason. A murmur of discontent began to ripple through the gathered crowd. Some patrons instinctively recoiled from Veronica's harsh demeanor. while others watched Jamal with a mixture of empathy and anger. Among them was Naomi Davis, a young woman who had witnessed the entire scene. Sensing an injustice, she quietly approached Jamal, offering him a reassuring smile. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked softly. As if aware that the confrontation was about more than just a missing wallet, it was about the dignity of a man unjustly accused. Jamal nodded, though the hurt in his eyes spoke volumes. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady despite the undercurrent of pain. "But I really don't know anything about your wallet." Veronica, still fuming, rummaged through her purse with frantic urgency. The cafe's ambience turned from casual warmth to a tension-filled standoff. Other customers began whispering among themselves, some recording the scene on their smartphones while others tried to shield themselves from the escalating drama. In that charged moment, Veronica's mind raced with a mixture of certainty and panic. Her world, so meticulously arranged until now, was under threat. How could someone disrupt the order she so desperately clung to? In her eyes, Jamal was the perfect scapegoat, a symbol of everything she detested. Someone whose mere presence was an affront to her way of life. Yet as she fumbled through her purse, it became clear that her accusations were rooted more in prejudice than in fact. For Jamal, the accusation was not just a personal affront, it was a painful reminder of the biases that still haunted the community. He had learned, over the years, to navigate such stares and offhand comments with grace. But the public nature of Veronica's outburst, and the weight of her baseless accusation, cut deeper than any private insult ever could. Jamal's voice grew firmer as he addressed the growing crowd. "I understand you're upset. But accusing someone without evidence isn't right. Let's all take a moment to calm down." The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Veronica's face flushed with indignation as she insisted that her version of events was incontrovertible. "I know what I saw," she repeated, her voice rising with each word. "You're trying to cover your tracks. But I won't let you get away with it." As whispers swirled around the room and the cafe's regulars exchanged troubled glances, a couple of bystanders stepped forward to mediate. Mr. Henderson, the elderly owner of the corner bean, tried to restore calm. Now, let's not jump to conclusions," he said in a soothing tone. "Perhaps we should look for your wallet together. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Veronica's eyes darted between Jamal and Mr. Henderson. The suggestion of a misunderstanding was intolerable to her, it threatened the very narrative she had constructed. "There's no misunderstanding here," she snapped, her tone sharp. "I saw him. I know his type." The accusation, now laced with overt racial prejudice, sent shockwaves through the room. A hush fell over the cafe as the reality of her words sank in. It was not merely the loss of a wallet that was at stake, it was the integrity and respect of a man who had done nothing wrong. In that moment, the facade of civility that had long been Veronica's shield began to crumble under the weight of her own intolerance. Outside, the autumn wind howled, as if echoing the turmoil within. Every onlooker felt the gravity of the moment, sensing that something far more complex than a simple case of lost property was unfolding. Veronica's misplaced certainty and Jamal's dignified protest set the stage for a confrontation that would soon expose hidden truths and challenge the community's conscience. Unbeknownst to all present, the true story behind the missing wallet was about to emerge, a story that would not only shock everyone in the cafe but would also force each person to question their own biases and assumptions. For now, though, the incident remained an unresolved spark, its potential to ignite a far larger conflagration hanging in the balance. Veronica's eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disbelief as she glared at Jamal, who stood composed in the face of her barrage. The air was thick with tension, and every second that ticked by deepened the divide between accusation and truth. In that charged silence, the café, usually a haven of routine and comfort, had transformed into a stage for an unfolding drama, a drama where the lines between right and wrong were not yet clearly drawn. As the murmurs grew louder and the crowd began to polarize into those defending Jamal and those still swayed by Veronica's vehement claims, a solitary question echoed in the minds of all present: what had truly happened that morning? And more importantly, would the truth, when finally revealed, be able to heal the wounds already inflicted by a moment of unbridled prejudice? The stage was set. In the coming days, as more layers of the story would be peeled back and the intricacies of that fateful morning unraveled, everyone in Northwood would be forced to confront a reality that challenged their deepest beliefs. For now, though, all that remained was the bitter taste of accusation and the silent hope that truth, however elusive, would eventually shine through the darkness of prejudice. Veronica's eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disbelief as she glared at Jamal, who stood composed in the face of her barrage. The air was thick with tension, and every second that ticked by deepened the divide between accusation and truth. In that charged silence, the café, usually a haven of routine and comfort, had transformed into a stage for an unfolding drama, a drama where the lines between right and wrong were not yet clearly drawn. In the tense aftermath of the initial outburst at the corner bean, the café's atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The earlier confrontation between Veronica Stanton and Jamal Carter had left the space heavy with unease. No one stepped forward to defend Jamal. Instead, the patrons clustered in silent groups, exchanging furtive glances and whispered speculations. The air was thick with judgment, and every whispered remark deepened the isolation that Jamal felt. Veronica's accusations continued unabated. Standing near the counter with her purse clutched tightly, she glared at Jamal as if her eyes alone could prove his guilt. "I saw everything," she insisted repeatedly, her voice quavering between fury and a misguided sense of righteousness. "He was there, lurking with that look, like he was waiting for a chance to take what wasn't his." Her words, charged with a bitter certainty, reverberated off the café walls, drowning out the soft clatter of cups and the hum of the espresso machine. Jamal, on the other hand, remained composed. His voice was steady as he softly repeated, "I didn't do it." His simple denial was met not with support but with a silence that felt like a verdict. In the midst of the growing tension, the other patrons did not offer him comfort or words of defense. Instead, they formed small clusters, speaking in hushed tones about the incident as though it were a scandal unfolding before their eyes. Their eyes darted from one speaker to another, their whispers punctuating the heavy silence that dominated the room. As minutes turned into an hour, the café seemed to shrink around the two central figures. Veronica's demeanor grew more theatrical as she recounted her version of the events with increasing exaggeration. "I saw his suspicious glances. The way he moved, so furtive, so cunning," she declared, her tone laced with an unwavering conviction that bordered on obsession. Every detail, real or imagined, was hammered home with a passion that left no room for doubt in her mind. The onlookers, rather than challenging her narrative, absorbed every word with morbid fascination. They whispered to each other, their remarks barely audible over the background clinks of cutlery and the soft murmur of disinterested conversation. "Did you see that? She's so sure of herself," one patron murmured, while another replied, "I'm not saying he did it, but I can't help feeling there's something off." Their comments were not aimed at exonerating Jamal but served only to fuel the growing rumor mill. In their silence, they lent an unspoken approval to Veronica's accusations. Jamal's eyes, filled with a quiet sorrow, moved slowly across the room, meeting the dispassionate stares of those who had witnessed the scene. His quiet protest of innocence, "I have nothing to hide," was barely registered amid the low buzz of gossip. Each whispered comment, each sidelong glance, cut deeper than any shouted insult could. He stood there not as a criminal on trial, but as a man isolated by the prejudices of others who chose not to speak up against the tide of assumptions. The intensity of the moment grew as Veronica's frustration mounted. Unable to understand the silence around her, she began to raise her voice further. "Are you all really going to sit here and do nothing?" she demanded, her eyes sweeping the room in search of allies. But the cafe's patrons offered only silence or murmurs that quickly faded into the background. Their inaction spoke volumes. They were complicit in the narrative she spun, unwilling either to challenge her or to provide Jamal with the defense he so desperately needed. As the tension built, the cafe's interior transformed into a crucible of simmering resentment and bitter judgment. The muted clatter of coffee cups and the soft rustle of newspaper pages provided a stark contrast to the charged words between Veronica and Jamal. Veronica's voice, once clear and unwavering, now wavered with the strain of her own escalating emotion. "I know what I saw. Don't you see how obvious it is?" she cried, her eyes narrowing as she searched the faces of those around her for validation. In response, Jamal's quiet voice repeated his protest, a refrain of calm in the midst of chaos. "I didn't take anything," he said, each word measured and deliberate. His appeal was not met with any form of solidarity. Instead, the room's atmosphere remained weighted with an unsettling indifference. The silent bystanders continued to gossip amongst themselves, their words never rising above a murmur, their glances filled with a resigned judgment that left no room for alternative interpretations of the scene. Outside the windows, the day was slowly fading into dusk, casting long, somber shadows through the cafe's glass doors. The interplay of fading light and the darkening mood inside mirrored the erosion of civility. The warm, inviting space that once fostered friendly interactions now seemed to contain only a bitter chill, one born of unchallenged prejudice and the collective unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Veronica, feeling emboldened by the silence of those around her, took a step closer to Jamal. "I won't let you get away with this," she hissed, her tone both a threat and a declaration of self-righteous vindication. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity. And in that moment, the cafe became a stage for a private drama, a spectacle of two figures locked in an ideological battle. With the rest of the world watching silently, the whispers from the onlookers grew more animated, yet remained detached. They discussed the incident as if it were a piece of salacious gossip rather than a serious accusation of theft. "I can't believe she's so sure," one woman said quietly to her companion, while another remarked, "It's just a wallet. But look at the way she's acting. It's like she's on a mission." Their remarks floated through the air, not as a defense of Jamal, but as a commentary on the absurdity of the situation, and the extreme measures of one woman whose prejudice had overtaken her reason. In the midst of all this, Jamal's resolve began to falter under the weight of the isolation. Each whisper, every sidelong glance, eroded a little more of his hope that someone might stand up for the truth. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of empathy or support. But the silent consensus was clear: no one was willing to disturb the uneasy balance by challenging Veronica's narrative. The silence of the cafe was not an act of neutrality, it was a tacit acceptance of the accusations laid before them. Veronica, sensing that the tide of gossip was firmly in her favor, pressed on with her tirade. "You see how everyone's looking," she proclaimed, gesturing dramatically toward the silent crowd. "They know the truth, even if they won't say it out loud." Her words were met with a ripple of murmurs, a confirmation of the shared sentiment that had settled over the room. In that moment, her rhetoric seemed to carry the weight of incontrovertible evidence. Even though it was built entirely on her own biased perceptions, Jamal's attempt at a quiet rebuttal was swallowed by the charged atmosphere. His plea for understanding was lost in the clamor of whispered judgments and the oppressive silence of those who chose not to intervene. "I'm asking for nothing more than the truth," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. But the truth was drowned out by the relentless barrage of accusations. And the onlookers' silent complicity served only to underscore his isolation. As the last vestiges of daylight disappeared, the café remained locked in its standoff, a microcosm of a community divided not by loud declarations, but by the quiet, persistent power of unchallenged prejudice. Veronica's fury, and Jamal's quiet desperation filled the space with a tension that would not dissipate. In the end, it was the silence of those around them, a silence filled with whispered gossip and judgment, that spoke most loudly of all. No one had risen to defend or to dispute, the café had become a theater of inaction, where the only voices that mattered were those of accusation and resigned acceptance. The atmosphere inside the corner beam was still charged with the lingering tension of the previous chaos. Though the initial uproar had subsided, an uneasy stillness had replaced it, a quiet anxiety that clung to every corner of the café. The air was heavy with whispered doubts and the sharp sting of regret. And every patron seemed to wait with bated breath for the next turn in an unfolding drama that had shaken their community. In this charged environment, Naomi Davis, whose steady concern had provided a quiet counterpoint to the earlier frenzy, rose from her seat, with a determined gaze that cut through the murmuring crowd. She addressed the two central figures. "We need to resolve this once and for all," she declared firmly. "I suggest we inspect both of your bags right now." Her words, calm yet authoritative, drew every eye in the café. The silence that followed was thick with expectation. Veronica Stanton's face flushed, her eyes darting nervously between Naomi and Jamal Carter. Despite her earlier confidence, her posture betrayed uncertainty. Jamal, however, maintained his quiet composure, his steady gaze meeting Naomi's with a calm resignation. Naomi moved first. "Veronica, please," she said, gesturing towards her with gentle insistence. Veronica hesitated, then slowly retrieved her purse from her bag. With trembling fingers, she unfastened the clasp and allowed Naomi to sift through its contents. The onlookers leaned in, their collective curiosity turning the moment into a silent spectacle. At first, Naomi's hand emerged with the expected assortment, crumpled receipts, a faded photograph, and other mundane remnants of a busy day. But then, buried deep among these everyday items, she found it, a worn leather wallet embossed with a familiar name. A collective intake of breath rippled through the café. This was the very wallet Veronica had claimed was stolen, a wallet that, in truth, had never left her side. Veronica's eyes widened as she stared at the wallet. Her earlier accusations now rendered baseless in the light of this undeniable evidence. Her voice, which had once cut through the room with certainty, now faltered. I must have misplaced it," she murmured, barely audible over the soft hum of the café. The truth of her error was sinking in, and the weight of her own misjudgment pressed heavily upon her. Without pausing, Naomi turned her attention to Jamal. "Now, let's see what's in your bag," she said, her tone equally firm as she requested his bag. Jamal produced his bag with quiet dignity, handing it over without a trace of defensiveness. Naomi opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the neatly organized interior. Amidst the orderly arrangement of documents and personal items, something unusual caught her eye, a sealed envelope bearing the embossed logo of a well-known corporation. With a measured motion, she unfolded the document inside. As she read, the murmurs of the onlookers swelled into a hushed chorus of astonishment. The document revealed that Jamal Carter was not the common man that the heat of the moment had painted him to be. In fact, he was the owner of one of Northwood's largest enterprises, a respected businessman whose success had fueled numerous philanthropic projects throughout the town. The paper detailed his extensive investments in community centers, educational initiatives, and various charitable programs that had transformed countless lives in the area. The revelation was seismic. In that instant, the narrative of suspicion and prejudice began to crumble, replaced by the undeniable truth of Jamal's identity and contributions. Naomi, holding the document aloft for all to see, spoke with a clarity that resonated through the silent room. This document shows that Mr. Carter here is not only innocent of the theft but is also a pillar of our community, a successful business owner and a generous benefactor whose investments have enriched our town. The café, which had earlier been a stage for harsh accusations and unfounded prejudice, now became a crucible of introspection. The onlookers' expressions shifted from shock to a deep, reflective remorse. In the midst of this, Veronica's confident facade crumbled entirely. Overwhelmed by the evidence of her mistake, she sank into her chair, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. It was in this charged silence that Veronica's transformation began. The reality of her error, manifest in the recovered wallet, and the shining truth of Jamal's identity, forced her to confront not only the specific injustice she had perpetrated but also the deep-seated prejudices that had clouded her judgment for so long. Unable to bear the weight of her guilt, Veronica rose slowly from her seat. Her steps were hesitant, and every movement spoke of inner turmoil and dawning self-awareness. With quiet determination, she approached Jamal, whose calm presence remained a steady anchor amid the storm of revelations. The murmurs of the onlookers softened into a respectful silence, as if everyone sensed that something profoundly important was about to unfold. Jamal, Veronica began, her voice unsteady yet sincere. I need to apologize. Her eyes shone with genuine remorse as she met his steady gaze. I accused you out of fear and prejudice, and I let my assumptions override the truth. I was wrong. For a long moment, time seemed to pause. Jamal's expression softened as he regarded Veronica, not with bitterness, but with a measured kindness born of years of quiet endurance. Thank you for saying that, he replied gently. It takes courage to admit a mistake. His tone was calm and forgiving, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had raged earlier. Veronica's apology resonated deeply with the silent crowd. In that heartfelt exchange, the true cost of baseless judgment was laid bare, not just in the humiliation and pain inflicted upon an innocent man, but in the erosion of one's own integrity. As she stood there, her eyes welling with tears of regret and hope, Veronica felt the first stirrings of a change in her heart, a small but significant shift away from the prejudices that had so long defined her perspective. Naomi, standing nearby, nodded in quiet approval. We all have our biases, she said softly, addressing the room. But today, let this be a turning point. We must learn to see people for who they truly are, not through the lens of our fears. The impact of these words was palpable. Gradually, the expressions in the café transformed from shock and disdain to thoughtful introspection. Patrons who had earlier whispered harsh judgments now exchanged looks of regret and empathy. Some even murmured apologies under their breath. Acknowledging the collective failure to stand against prejudice, Veronica remained by Jamal's side. Not in a show of contrition alone, but seeking to understand him beyond the shallow confines of her former assumptions. "I've heard so many things about you," she said quietly. "I assumed the worst because of my own insecurities. But seeing you here, knowing all that you've done for this community, I realize how wrong I was." Jamal's response was gentle, filled with the patience of a man who had long borne the brunt of misunderstanding. "It's not about what you assumed," he said softly. "It's about learning and growing beyond those assumptions. I've always believed that true strength lies in the willingness to change." As the day wore on, the café slowly began to return to its normal rhythm. Yet, the events of that day had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Veronica's sincere apology and the revelations that had unfolded became a catalyst for change, not only for her, but for the entire community. In the weeks that followed, Veronica embarked on a personal journey of self-reflection and learning. She attended community meetings, listened to stories from those who had suffered because of unchecked prejudice, and gradually began to dismantle the stereotypes that had once imprisoned her thoughts. Jamal, ever gracious, continued his daily routines at the corner bean with his characteristic quiet dignity. His willingness to forgive and his steadfast commitment to truth served as an enduring lesson to those around him. His status as a successful business owner and dedicated philanthropist was no longer overshadowed by a moment of false accusation. Instead, it shone through as a beacon of resilience and integrity. In time, Veronica's transformation became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of honest apology and the possibility of change. She and Jamal even found common ground in their shared desire to make Northwood a place of unity and understanding. Together, they initiated community projects that aimed to bridge the divides between people, fostering dialogue and reconciliation in a town still healing from the wounds of prejudice. The echoes of that tumultuous day in the corner bean, with its explosive accusations and the eventual unveiling of truth, continued to reverberate throughout Northwood. Yet, within those echoes was a quiet promise of redemption. Veronica's journey from anger and baseless judgment to sincere remorse and a willingness to change became a reminder that even the deepest prejudices can be challenged, and that every person has the capacity to evolve. As dusk fell and the café emptied for the evening, the once oppressive silence now carried a note of cautious optimism. In that reflective quiet, the lessons of the day stood as a solemn promise that truth, when embraced with humility and compassion, has the power to transform not only individuals but entire communities. And in the tender, sincere exchange between Veronica and Jamal, a new chapter was born, one defined not by the cruelty of unfounded assumptions, but by the enduring light of understanding and the possibility of genuine change. How do you feel about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback to improve even more. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our latest videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.